everyone. My name is Rabbi Elif. I'm Managing Director of Community Relations for OU Kosher. It's our pleasure to be here with the Lander community tonight. We'd like to thank Chazaq for sponsoring tonight's event and for coordinating the efforts behind the scenes. We'd like to start with Divrei Brach and Divrei Psicha from Rabbi Herschel Welcher, Shlita, Rav of Congress Hamas Yisrael, and Yosef Rosh, the Vada Kashus of Vada of Queens, to start the program. Rabbi Welcher.
Thank you, Rabbi Elif. It's nice to be here at Lander College. I'd like to welcome the OU to our community, and especially Moshe Elephant, a very, very close Yedid, and not only a Yedid, but a Yoyetz as well. Consult regularly with him in matters which affect our community and the Kashrus, and we appreciate the expertise and the friendship that he brings to bear. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is a role that he plays for communal kashrus organizations across the entire country. His involvement, his direction, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated. We appreciate him, and we appreciate the AU. We had a night last night, we experienced phenomenal nisim. Phenomenal nisim. The world is astounded by what took place. Chumash tells us in Chumash Dvorim, Lo merubchem mikol ha'amim, choshak b'cho, ki atem ma'at mikol ha'amim. And the Ramban explains that the Rebbeinu Shalom loves Klal Yisrael, not because we are a mighty nation in the sense of being huge with a huge population. Ki atem ma'at mikol ha'amim. We're a very small nation. But of Kadosh Baruch Hu loves and appreciates the dedication of Klal Yisrael to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That under any and all circumstances we are committed to him. Rav Yonasan Eivshitz was once asked by a non-Jewish monarch that in your Torah it says, Achari Rabbim Lahatis, you should follow the majority. And you're a tiny minority here in Europe, so you should follow the majority. So why do you steadfastly retain their own identity? And Rav Yonasan Eivshitz answered, if one understands the halacha, roiv only affects cases where we have doubts. But when we know with certainty something is true, then there's no place for roiv, and we follow even the miyutz. And I once heard from an Adam Godel that the kashrus in Pesach is unusual in general kashrus, and the fact that even a mashru, the slightest bit of chametz, is osur. And he said, that's to teach us the lesson that there are times in Jewish life that the miyut is choshev too. We're a tiny people, but we're choshev, we're significant. And because, despite the fact that Einam Nevada Yishkon can stand against the world, but we can be comfortable where we are, the miyut is also choshev. In the celebration of Pesach, undoubtedly, kashrus is at the top of the list. It's the most difficult thing to accomplish, and the one that Baruch Hashem we have able shluchim in the OU that invest months and months of tremendous professional expertise. That kashrus should be relatively simple for us. If one studies the Shulchan Aruch is very, very difficult. Many simonim which deal with the kashrus of Pesach. Tov Mem Beis, Tov Tam Mem Zayin, Tov Samach Vav Zayin. The kashrus which affects us before Pesach, during Pesach, very, very complex. And this used to be in earlier generations the responsibility of every Yid, because everything was prepared at home. Now everything is farmed out. We cook a little bit of meat and vegetables in the house, but all the products that we use are produced elsewhere in factories. And Baruch Hashem, we have the OU as the head of kashrus in the United States and probably in the world, to be able to oversee everything which takes place. And therefore, it is a very special privilege to have Rabbi Elephant with us to speak about what the OU does for kashrus. Chakosha b'sameach to all of us.
Privileged to have the Mashgiach for Lander College of Bamberger with us to say some Divrei Bracha.
Kashus Rabbanon, Chashuvim, community members, Talmidim. It's a very big honor to be here this evening representing the host of this event, one of the hosts of this event, at the Lander College for Beis Medrash Talmud. I know the hour is late and we all want to get to the main speaker, but let me just give a little brief hakdama. I saw something yesterday I thought it was very fascinating, very nageya to what we're going through today. The Malbim has a pirush on Daniel, on Sefer Daniel, and at the end of his pirush, he makes his own cheshbon of approximately when Mashiach is supposed to arrive. And when he published his Sefer, a lot of Gedolei Yisrael wrote to him and said, how could you do such a thing? There are Chazalim that say that you're not supposed to be Chishav es HaKetz. If somebody's Machashav es HaKetz, it's Tipa Chatzmeisav. It's not a good thing to do. So how can you go ahead and do it? To which the Malbim responded that there was a mashal of a father and a son that started heading out on a wagon to a very far away Yerid, a fair in Leipzig. They went from Eastern Europe to Leipzig, and it took many, many weeks. And as the Agala was leaving, maybe an hour or two in, the son asked his father, are we almost there yet? And his father gave him a dirty look, like it's not a question you should be asking, it's inappropriate, such a question. And then 2 weeks later, as they were almost at their destination, the father himself asks the Baal Agala, asks the wagon driver, are we almost there yet? And the son looks at his father incredulously and says, why is it that when I asked that question, you gave me a very dirty look, you were displeased with that question, and now all of a sudden it's okay for Tatu to ask? And the father answers the son that when you asked the question, we were so near the beginning of the journey that it was like a ridiculous question to ask. We're so far away from the destination that to start asking now, when are we getting there? Are we almost there? That's not appropriate. But now that we're almost at our destination, now it's fair to ask, are we almost there yet? How much longer are we going to be there in? And the Malbim says that that's exactly what happens in the Skalas. If we were to make cheshbonos at the beginning of the Galas 2,000 years ago, and to ask ourselves, when is it going to happen? That would not be a normal question, because it's so far away that it just would do nothing but bring people down. But now that we're so close to the time of the Geula, now it's a very, very appropriate question to ask, are we almost there yet? And to that I made a cheshbon in my pirush on Sefer Daniel. I think that the times that we're living in are very, very miraculous. As Rabbi Welcher said, it was Nisim Gluyim that we saw last night. Of course, it's shrouded in technology, but the technology itself is a Nes Nigla. And for us to be able to be Zaycha and Chaydesh Nisan to such unbelievable Hashkacha Pratis, we don't know exactly when is the Mashiach going to arrive, but we definitely can feel and hear the footsteps of Mashiach. And it's appropriate to think now to ourselves and to discuss openly, when is Mashiach going to come? And Amitzah Hashem, B'Nisan Nigalu, B'Nisan Asidin Ligael, Amitzah Hashem, this month should be a month of continued Nisim, and should be a month that we're Zeicha to be eating Min Azvachim, Min Apsachim, and Baruch Hashem, we have Paiskim, like Rabbi Elephant, like Rabbi Rabinowitz, to be able to tell us not only now in Galus what we made and what we may not eat, but in Mitzvah Hashem also with the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, they'll also be able to paskin the Shilas of Kadshim.
Before we go into the OU presentation part, we call upon Rabbi Ilan Meirov, the Rabbi Rashi, the rabbinical head of Chazaq, for the Divrei Psichon.
Morai Rabotai, it's a tremendous kavod and honor for me to be sitting here today and speaking with such chashuv rabbanim. I don't feel like it's my place to be here, but once I'm given the podium, I'll share with you something for 2 minutes. I actually haven't been in Landers College for about 18 years. I was here for the last semester, right before I got married. I was in Orach Chaim, Yeshiva Orach Chaim. I had 3 more credits to finish up over here. And I was getting married. I told my soon-to-be wife, I'll do the 3 credits next month, Bezrat Hashem. Let me get 1 full Zman of learning in Yeshiva, in Koilo. And here I am 19 years later, I still didn't finish those 3 credits. But Bezrat Hashem, we'll get there. We're going to make it happen. B'chalef and Rabotai, just share with you a small idea. I was actually Rabbi Alep's, we were Chavruses at that time, Rabbi Aleph. I don't know if you remember that. The good old days when we had no pressure in life. But share with you a quick idea on Pesach. You know, people like good sgulos. And, you know, for zivugim, for shalema, for parnasa, if you have a good sgula, why not? We'll grab it, we'll do it. Now, Baruch Hashem, the Yom Tov of Pesach has many beautiful sgulas over there, for everyone and every occasion. But there's one which is very, very questionable. I read it to you inside. The Ber Hativ brings that from the Arizal. He says, Hanizar b'mashu chametz Pesach, one who's very careful with even a mashu of chametz on Pesach, muftach lo shelo yechet kol hashana. He's guaranteed not to do an avera the whole year. Muftach, it's a guarantee. That's what they bring that from the Arizal. Now, if you look at the other sgulot of Pesach, they all quote unquote make sense. For example, it's brought down by being ma'amik in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, you're doing a tikkun for the pegam of dibur kol hashana. When a person is eating the proper shear of matzah and maror, he's metaking the isra achila they may have had throughout the year. When a person is mesiv kehalacha for the dalet kosos and for matzah, it's a tikkun for all the gaiva you may have had all year round. A person that spends money on a beautiful ke'ara, silver, makes it beautiful, it's brought down as gula leparnasa. But you see this gula and the action are very attached to each other. It makes sense. But what the Arizal here says is a little bit questionable. Why? Had he said, Azahir memashu chametz, you muftach not to eat machalos yisuros, you know, that makes sense. You're not eating chametz, you won't fall for dvarim asurim and kashrus. But that's not what he says. He says, whoever is zahir for mashu chametz, then you won't do any chet. Not lashon hara and shmiras and naim and geneva and gezel. What's the connection? I don't eat mashu chametz, I'm protected from all the averot. Tell me you're protected from dvarim asurim and achila, but why all the averos? So I'll share with you a beautiful Kaf HaChaim I saw from Rav Chaim Vital. He quotes Rav Chaim Vital as follows. He said, what's the ikar hatzagas ha'adam ruach HaKodesh? If I ask you, what do you have to do to reach a level of ruach HaKodesh? You have siyata d'shmaya with all your decisions. So you might say, go to the mikveh every morning, or wear Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, Tikkun Chatzos. The Kaf HaChaim says, Rav Chaim Vital says, absolutely not. He says, the ikar Hasaga for Ruach HaKodesh is a person that's careful to make kol bekot nehenin bezehirut mila b'mila. When you make a bracha on foods and drinks, apple and oranges and fish and chicken and meat, you make it slowly with kavana, then you're going to be infused with Ruach HaKodesh. Why? Says Rav Chaim Vital b'Shem that Rizal. He explains that every food item that we have is surrounded by different spiritual shells called klipot. So, if you make a bracha chelebele with kavana, then you bring in the klipot into your system. But if you make a bracha with kavana, word for word, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu hamayitzi lachem min haaretz, word for word. You see today, how do the kids make brachas on bread? On the shawarma? Hamayitzi lachem min haaretz, before they even say, they finish, no, you shouldn't have a hefsek, right? The shawarma is already in the mouth, Baruch Hashem. Right? But if you say it word for word, milah b'milah, says the Arizal, you're taking away the klipot, and you have nothing but ruchnias, zach, ma'achal zach coming into your system. And therefore, you have a level of Ruach HaKodesh that you're able to tap into. Based on this, I heard from a very chashuv Rav in Eretz Yisrael, he brings that from the Zohar Kadosh, that Rav Eliezer once asked his father, Rishon Bar Yochai, he says, Abba, what pshat we don't eat chametz and Pesach, and what pshat that it's bal yirah bal yimatzeh? All year round we say, V'achata v'savatu v'ach l'shem elokecha, we're encouraged to eat bread, you have a special mitzvah mid'oraisa to make because of mazon, and suddenly at Pesach we're making it mamish, bal yirah bal yimatzeh. What's the reason? So the Rashbi explained to his son about the whole Indian of Yetzer Hara and chametz and how it's tamtem a person. So he tells his father, if so, we shouldn't eat chametz all year round. Why are we eating it all year round? So Rishon Bar Yochai explains that that's part of the tikkun of the achila. So all year round you eat it, and at Pesach you don't eat it. And Rav Shlomo Amar explained this as follows. And listen to the words he says, and this is how we're going to end off. He says the koach of the Yetzer Hara that's in the chametz is not activated if you protect yourself from chametz on Pesach. That means all year round you can eat all the pizza and all the bagels you want. But on Pesach you hold yourself back from even a mashu of chametz, then the negativity of the chametz is not going to be activated. But if you have even a mashu of chametz on Pesach, then what happens is l'tzarenu harad you can be affected by the Yetzer Hara. Therefore, says Arizal, if you're zarim in mashu chametz b'Pesach, then you have the protection. The Yetzer Hara won't affect you. Why? Because all that negativity is not going to be activated. So you might ask, but what about our bechira? So on that, the Mishas Chasidim, one of the Mekubalim from Italia, writes. He says the real gerson of the Arizal is muftach lo shelo yavo chet liyado, that you're guaranteed the chet won't come to you. If you're zahir from mashu chametz, the chet will come to you. If you want to do a chet, you can go do it. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make sure chet will come le'adecha. You know, everyone always says asher yosef b'secha when it comes to Pesach. But I think we could say, thanks to the OU, we can be confident to eat outside of our homes as well on Pesach. Shkoyach for the opportunity, and we should be zochet to Bezrat Hashem to eat this year Pesach to be in Yerushalayim Mech HaKodesh with the Binyan Bet HaMikdash and Mashiach Tzidkenu. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Meirov. It's my pleasure to introduce next the Senior Rabbinic Coordinator in OU Kosher, also the editor of the OU's Pesach Directory, which there are complimentary copies available to everybody here at the back table. Please make sure to take one before you leave tonight. Rabbi Nachum Rabinowitz has worked for many years dealing with Pesach, running a lot of the behind-the-scenes Pesach operations. We have a whole Pesach department headed by Rabbi Dr. Shmuel Singer. But Rabbi Rabinowitz has been at the forefront of making sure that things are taken care of for the community. One of the needs of the community, as the Sephardic community has, Baruch Hashem, gotten larger, has been the need for a Kidneyot certification. So Rabbi Rabinowitz will discuss a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes of OUP, the regular Pesach certification, as well as the OU Kidneyot certification. So Rabbi Rabinowitz.
I mentioned before that we've seen in leasing of technology in the last 24 hours. Apparently not tonight. But in any case, we'll try to give a simple perspective and overview of what kidneys is. The OU is Kinyan Hashkacha there's a symbol OU Kidneyot for the last about maybe 12, 13 years. And the reason that the OU, although for the first 90 years of its existence, did not engage in that was simply because the predominant population was were keeping Pesach were Ashkenazim. But Rav Belsky, Zechat Tzaddik Lebracha, who was one of the poskim of the OU, very much encouraged that the OU should be involved in OU Kidneyot. Why? Because what had happened in the growing Sephardic community was that people were relying on assumptions. People tried to make estimations or guesstimations of what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable. And as a result, people were using products without special supervision for Pesach. And they made all kinds of assumptions, and the OU, with its expertise, knew that in many instances that wasn't the correct approach. So Rav Belsky really encouraged the OU to get involved in Kidneyot Hashkacha. So I'm trying to just give a certain overview. I'll use this for notes, if not anything else. It's interesting. Klal Yisrael has taken many routes to get to the place that we are. And for some, the route was through Eastern Europe, Western Europe. For some, it was through Spain. For some, it was through Northern Africa. For others, it was Persia, that lovely place that sent us some gifts over the last day or so. And what's amazing is that we've all ended up where we are, and we continue to maintain that heritage. And the mitzvah of the Seder is V'garta L'bincha, that each family transmit their unique heritage. And as much as there are many halacha, which are sort of sacrosanct, but that's what it is, that this is the halacha, and really nobody differs from it. But there are many minhagim, beautiful minhagim, that each individual community maintained. And as a result, you have different minhagim, and even within families today, sometimes there's quote-unquote intermarriage between Sfardim and Ashkenazim, between Hasidim and others. So you have this whole beautiful mosaic of minhagim that are observed in Pesach. And the Gadat Levimcha is about transmitting that unique perspective that each family has from its traditions to the next generation, so that we can continue and be what we are. And that gives us hope in Salas, especially when there's so much hatred at the outside. We've been through it, whether it was through Germany, whether it was through France, whether it was through Russia, whether it was through Morocco, whether it was through Persia, wherever it was. This is the beauty of Klal Yisrael. We've gone through all kinds of challenges, and we've made it through. And that's exactly what's going to continue to happen for us. Ada Bias Agoel. So what is the minig of Kittiyot, and where did it start from? If you take a look, the Gemara talks about 5 types of grain, which are, on the one hand, kosher for matzah. They are wheat, spelt, rye, oats, and barley. Those 5 grains can be made into matzah under very special conditions. And what is unique about them, since the pasuk puts together chametz and matzah, the Gemara tells us that only those things that can become chametz are those things that can be used for the mitzvah of matzah. So that's it. As a result, if you take something like corn, there shouldn't be an issue. It's not chametz, and of course you can't make matzah out of it. And so many other grains, quote unquote, that's the way they're referred to. But in the halacha, only those 5 are considered grains. Gemara actually has a question whether oras v'dochen, which are typically translated as rice and millet, whether those perhaps could be used for matzah and could become, there's a shita one day of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in the Gemara, which we do not follow. Nobody follows that. But nonetheless, in the Gemara, we see introduced a concept that maybe there's something else that we have to be careful for. So the first actually recorded source for Kittiyot is what's called the Smak, the Sefer Mitzvos Kotten. He lived about 750 years ago. He was from the early period of the Rishonim. And what he writes is that they had already accepted this minhag to not use, to forbid those types of either beans, legumes, seeds that fit into a certain category. That was already forbidden by what he says from his Rabbeim and Kadmonim, even it seems much earlier. The Smak was from the early Rishon. He was from the Balei HaTosfot. That means he was in the period which was either alongside Rashi or slightly after Rashi. And again, he's quoting this, and he says that this is what we do amongst the Ashkenazim. He quotes others that did not observe this, but it seems it was already a prevalent minhag when he mentioned that, or was it Gzeira? It's not clear exactly how we define it. Is it a minhag? Is it Gzeira? But it's not voluntary. It's not optional. It's not as if we can say, yeah. But if we're familiar with Rabbeinu Gershom Maragola. Rabbeinu Gershom was sort of from the period of the Gaonim into the period of the Rishonim. And he established, we're familiar that a husband doesn't take 2 wives. Polygamy is forbidden. Why? Because of Rabbeinu Gershom. Forbidden to all of Klal Yisrael? No. Why is that? Because when the Gemara was called the Hasimus HaGemara, when the Gemara, the Talmud Bavli, was completed, you could no longer make halacha, which was, obligatory for all of Klal Yisrael. So when he made that gezerah, he made it specifically for Ashkenazim, and it was not adopted more broadly. As a result, polygamy continued by Sfardim for many, many generations. Today, it's no longer accepted. Rabbanan amongst the Sephardi communities that I'm aware of will never marry a husband to a second wife. That said, this minhag of Kittiyot, which was adopted on a limited scale, is not obligatory to everybody, and therefore, Sfardim who do eat Kittiyot, that's their tradition, they should continue to do so. There's no reason for them to adopt what we have as Ashkenazim. And Rav Belsky therefore felt that, yes, Sephardim should not be cut in ways that we Ashkenazim would never use many products without special Pesach supervision. He says, why should the Sephardim be less? Why should they have less? So we very much encourage that where we can, we should try to provide. And there's say it's a large group of products. There are many products that do have that hashgacha. What are some of the issues? Why is it? So that the SMAC actually mentions a reason. Having to wear it. I'll just fully believe it. Okay. It looks like that's not going to work out. But in any case, I just need to points of reference. So you have, let's say, rice, millet that the Gemara actually mentions. You have corn. You have buckwheat. You have peas, beans. These are all identified and accepted as kitniot. And that seems to be without question. Any Ashkenazi who would want to partake of those does not partake of them. You can't do anything with it. You can't use it. You can't even make matzah out of it, which you would think, how could it be worse than the chametz itself? But this is the way the Gzeira was established. It was adopted by Ashkenazi communities, and therefore it is what it is. So the reasons behind it are, the Smak, who's the first recorded source, he mentions the reason for it is that because they ground it up and they made it into flour, and they used it much the way wheat flour was used. Therefore, if people were to be allowed to make bread, like there is such a concept of cornbread, if you could make it so people would become confused, people were not learned, and they might come to use wheat in a similar fashion, and that would be actual chametz. And because of that, they made this gezerah, they made this resolution amongst at least Ashkenazim not to use it. There's another reason that the Beit Yosef, of course, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch, wrote, and he said the reason was because of what they do is crop rotations. When you have a field, you're a farmer, so in order to strengthen the field, you don't want to necessarily use the same crop year after year after year, which would weaken the field. Instead, with crop rotations, you might one year grow wheat, but the next year corn, and then the following year again wheat. And that leaves the possibility to be cross-contamination, where you can have some of the wheat which actually enters into the corn, or vice versa. And therefore, if you use corn and you don't properly check it, and I guess that the assumption was it could not properly be checked, so therefore one might come to use chametz. Today, even without crop rotations, which do exist, by the way, there's another problem, that is the milling of today, especially with a lot of gluten-free diets out there. You have all kinds of different grains which are being milled, and they may use the same mills to do both. And unless they're properly cleaned, and I can tell you that to clean a mill for matzah is a very difficult task. And unless it's done that way, there's always the possibility of having some chametz contaminants in something like corn or into other types of grains. As a result, these two reasons form the basis for why kitnios are not used. Then we come into sort of a question. Allah halamaisa. So it's interesting that the language that Joseph uses. He says the less the chash l'dvarim halalu, meaning kitnia, nobody's concerned about this. Zulasi ha'ashkenazim. Only the Ashkenazim are worried about this. So the Beis Yosef, as much as he quotes this and he mentions it, that it was real, and there are Rishonim that certainly observed it, but the Beis Yosef doesn't feel it's worthy, except he says for Ashkenazim, he was a Sephardi. He came from Spain. As a child, he left in 1492 with the expulsion, and he made his way to Tzfat, where he's buried ultimately, but he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and he wasn't concerned about this. And if he wasn't concerned about it, I would certainly not recommend any Sephardi to be concerned about it. The Ramah, on the other hand, says that Yesh Osra. The Ramah represented the Ashkenazim. He wrote the glosses on the Shulchan Aruch, which were intended for those who were Ashkenazim. And he says, no. There are those who observe this not to use this. And he says the minig of Ashkenaz is to be stringent, not to use this. He says, however, realize the limitations of this gzera. They are, if you were to have some, let's say, corn or some buckwheat fall into something which is for Pesach, he said you can rely on bittul. Usually, chametz on Pesach we say is not bittul. There's no nullification. Usually 1 in 60 becomes nullified. That doesn't apply on Pesach itself. So the tiniest amount of chametz will render the entire food forbidden. In this instance, it's not like that. In this instance, we can rely on bittul because it's a gzeira, it's not a real Torah prohibition. It's only a rabbinic prohibition for Ashkenazim. Also, he says it's not forbidden to maintain. We don't keep chametz in our homes. Bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. We don't keep anything in our homes, but one can keep kitniot in their homes. There's no reason to dispose of kitniot, even if you're an Ashkenazi. Furthermore, you can use it for other non-edible purposes. If you're using it, let's say for candle, you make oil out of kitniot and you want to use that to kindle fires, that's certainly permitted. And that's very relevant, for example, in the instance of medications. Medications today they have what's called the active ingredient, which is usually very, very small, but there's a carrier, there's something which is used to hold it together, and that's usually, at least in the United States, it's usually kitnios. So you'll tell me, I'm an Ashkenazi, how can I possibly take medications? The answer is you're not taking it, eating it as you would a food. What you're doing is taking it as a medication. Under those circumstances, the poskim will say that it's certainly permitted to do so. Of course, if you have a chalba, if you have someone who's ill, or if you have infants, they can certainly use kitniot, even amongst the Ashkenazim. So there's no question you can keep it, you can maintain it, and use it under those prescribed, limited circumstances. It's interesting historically that today we live in communities which have both Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but in Europe it wasn't like that, or even Europe or whatever communities, the community either was Sephardi or was Ashkenazi. There was one unique community that was Amsterdam. Amsterdam had both Ashkenazim and Sephardim, and there was the chief rabbi of Amsterdam was the Chacham Tzvi. And the Chacham Tzvi said, he wrote, his son, who was Rabbi Yachid Hamdan, writes, he said that his father said he would love to stop kitniot. I mean, he would, for a variety of reasons, but he said, I don't have the ability to do that. He said, you need to get all the Rabbanim together and to be mevatel it and to say that it no longer applies. But you see that over the generations, there were times when people became very frustrated with kitniot, and I know a lot of Sephardim have a lot of rahman on us that we have to keep this, but nonetheless, it's not optional, and the poskim say clearly it's not optional. So there are some newer types of grains or things that would fit under the category of kitniot, and nonetheless, it seems that it have not been adopted as such. For example, the Chayei Adam, who was one of the great poskim from Vilna about 250 years ago, he once felt that potatoes should be forbidden. Why? If you remember, he said that there are two reasons why kitniot are asur. One is because of cross properations and cross-contamination. The other is, we said, because you can make it a flour out of it. And that's very much what you can do with potatoes. There is such a thing called potato flour or potato starch. So if you can make it into flour, so that it should fit into that category. And the Chayei Adam said, but other poskim said, and for example, Moshe Feinstein writes at Chubin, says, potatoes were a late addition. When the time of the Rishonim, they didn't exist in our communities. He says, if something comes that didn't exist previously, we don't have to add what we have an established, practice that this was forbidden, something like corn or something like buckwheat. So then we continue to observe it. But we don't have to, even if there seems to be a rationale to include other things like potatoes, so it seems the poskim have said, and frankly, if without potatoes, I think we do most of us starve on Pesach. So that was not. But more recently, there's a question that came up. In South America, you have quinoa, and quinoa has become very popular. It's miracle grain. Now, what's the halacha of quinoa? So the OU debated this issue, and it's something which is used similar to cereal. It is not made into bread. So that there's sort of reasons why we might consider it one way or the other. But since this is what we call a New World grain, it didn't exist, not among the Ashkenazim or the Sephardim. It just never made its way to Europe or to Africa. It's really a South American grain. So the OU adopted the position that quinoa is not considered kitniot. Why? Because it didn't exist. If it didn't exist, there's no established. That's basically what I'm based on where Moshe writes. There's an interest. I've just mentioned one or two additional things. There's something called sorghum. Sorghum is a plant that has two components to it. It has a stalk, which you can make sugar out of, and it has seeds on the top, which you can make grain out of. You can make a cereal out of. So someone came up with the idea we can make, because the TTB, that's the regulatory for whiskey and for all alcohol, they said, you can make whiskey out of sorghum. So he said, we'll cultivate sorghum, not for the seeds, we'll remove the seeds, we'll just have it for the stalk, which is, it's really separate. There's no seeds there. It's not seeds, it's like a stalk, it's like cane sugar. And we can nonetheless call it whiskey. So we make whiskey, sorghum whiskey, it's a couple of years old. So that's the people, you can have your whiskey on Pesach as well, if that's something that you're interested in. Briefly, we spoke earlier about the assumptions that are sometimes made. Rice. So rice is very popular, but the OU, although it recommends using rice, raw rice, not something like a par-cooked rice, does a sort of pre-cooked partially, because you never know with something which is processed what could be affected. But enriched rice, that means in this country especially, they take vitamins and they add it. It's not added, it would be bottled typically, but it's a coating. It's a coating on the rice, and as a result, it is not necessarily a mixture which would become bottled before Pesach, and it might potentially be chametz, so we do not recommend using enriched rice, although perhaps something which is a rice, which like a basmati rice, which is typically not enriched, that's something that Sephardim could use. There is a Moroccan minhag to check the rice because of what we mentioned earlier, that even amongst Sephardim, there were some who were also concerned about cross-contamination, and therefore they would check the rice before they would use it. Because I worked with Heinz ketchup for many years, many had assumed that something like Heinz ketchup probably could be used by Sephardim. Why? Well, what is it made out of? What is it made of? Tomatoes. That's the primary ingredient. But there's also corn sugar. Corn sugar is a sweetener which is based on corn, which is kitniot. But again, for Sephardim, that should be fine. It also has vinegar in it, and vinegar, in this instance, is based on corn. The problem with these are that the corn syrup is treated with enzymes. To make what's called high fructose corn syrup, they reacted with an enzyme, and that makes it sweeter than it was in its original state. Corn is a glucose. They want to make it into high fructose, which means more similar to sugar, like sucrose. There's different types of sugar in the levels of sweetness. Since those enzymes are questionable, we wouldn't recommend using corn syrup on Pesach even with Sephardim. And certainly the vinegar, which undergoes a fermentation with yeast, again, we don't, unless you know specifically that there's no chametz involved, so then that's something we would not recommend. And typically many products, unless you have specific sources, reliable sources that recommend products to be used, one should look for a hechsher, look for a reliable hechsher to know that the products are acceptable. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Moshe Elephant, the Chief Operating Officer, Executive Rabbinic Coordinator of OU Kosher, who's taking time out of his busy schedule. Among other things, he's also a relative of Shul, and getting ready for Pesach, to come here tonight to answer questions that have been submitted in advance that are of particular interest. Rabbi Elephant.
Thank you, Rabbi Elif. Before I begin to answer questions, I would just, of course, like to recognize as well I can't say a friend, because he's much more than a friend. He's a mentor, one of the preeminent Rabbonim here in Queens, Rabbi Herschel Welcher, a fantastic Talmid Chacham, Pesach, and somebody who every job comes with fringe benefits. And certainly one of the fringe benefits of working at the OU is that you get to know special people, and Rabbi Welcher is certainly on top of that list. And Rabbi Meirav, what he's done here in Queens and further for the Bukharan community is absolutely incredible. We at the OU now are in new offices, relatively new offices, but in our old offices we had barbers in the lobby who were all Rabbi Meirav's Talmidim. So we used to hear about Rabbi Meirav all of the time. In fact, one of these Talmidim, Rabbi Meirav, was very, very close with Rabbi Belsky, and he was very proud that Rabbi Belsky used him as a barber. And one time, even after Rabbi Belsky had not been well, he wasn't so strong, he tells Rabbi Belsky, I'm going to make a siyum. And Rabbi Belsky schlepped from Brooklyn to Queens to surprise him to attend the siyum. Afterwards, after Rabbi Belsky was nifter, he tells me I'm making the siyum, hint, hint. So I had to come to Queens, and then I stopped using him as a barber. I also want to recognize, and then I just want to make a comment before Rabbi Elf begins with his questions, but I do want to recognize we at the OU is really a lay leadership-driven organization, and we have a wonderful partnership. I'm at the OU already 36 years, and many of the presidents and lay leaders at the OU don't even know the presidents and lay leaders that I knew. But we have here tonight the president of the OU, Mr. Mitch Ader, and the partnership that exists between the rabbinic leadership and the lay leadership at the OU, and particularly we in Kashrus. It's absolutely incredible. And I'll just mention one point. There's a lot to say, but it's not the time and not the place. You know, lay leaders and Rabbanim don't always agree, and not for good reason. We have different perspectives. But in all of the years I'm at the OU, as I said, it's many years, never has there been an incident where we did not want to give a supervision. We did not want to give a hechsher, and the Baal Batim, the lay leader, said, no, we want you to do it. Actually, there's been just the opposite, where we wanted to do it, and they stopped us. And it's a tremendous testimony, I think, to the year of Shemayim that represents, that they recognize that this is what the halacha wants, and the halacha always comes first. I just want to make 2 points. One I've been speaking about much lately, not just lately, over the years, but this year as well. And last week at the OU, we had a meeting. We have always before the Yom Tovim a meeting of all the staff members that work in our office in downtown Manhattan, hundreds of people, and not just them, but all the staff all around the country and all around the world join us on Zoom at this town hall meeting. And I was asked just to speak briefly about some thoughts, halakha thoughts about Pesach. And I said this last year, and I said it again this year, about, and this is critical, it may already even be a little too late to say, because I'm sure many people have already started cooking and baking and certainly shopping for Yontif. And just because you go to a store that has a Pesach section or whatever, don't assume that everything you're buying must be certified for Pesach. And every year, and it was interesting, I spoke about this last Wednesday at the OU, and not an hour after I spoke about it, one of the people who work at the OU, one of the women, not even in Kashrus, came over to me. She got nervous after I spoke, and she called home, and she discovered that all the oil that they were using to cook for Pesach was really not kosher for Pesach. They had picked it up in the kosher for Pesach section at the supermarket where they bought, but it wasn't kosher for Pesach, and she already came with a question, now what do I do? So it's such an easy problem to solve. Then it's not just look for the OU symbol or whatever symbol, reliable, but it should be also kosher for Pesach. The one other point which my very dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Rabinowitz, mentioned, but I just want to pick up on. And it really, really something important, and it's something that bothers me a lot. You know, Baruch Hashem, there's such an abundance of kosher for Pesach food, whether it's OU certified or other reliable supervision. And what really, really bothers me, and should bother you as well, is that nobody's going to be hungry on Pesach. It's certainly not because of the lack of food that's kosher for Pesach. And this attitude that what could be wrong with this food? Today, in the morning in shul, somebody, a very fine person, he comes to my shir every morning, a really fine person comes over to me and asks me, is Snapple kosher for Pesach? Now, Snapple happens not to be a OU certified product. I asked him, is there a kosher for Pesach supervision, certification on it? He says, no. So I say, why would you think that you could drink Snapple if it's not certified for Pesach? So he says, well, what could be wrong with Snapple? I said, wait a minute, what could be wrong with Snapple? There's sweetener in it. There are flavors in it. It's made on equipment. And that's before I looked at the ingredient panel. And this attitude has become prevalent in our community. What could be wrong? And it must be kosher for Pesach. And the fact that it doesn't have a kosher for Pesach symbol, so Rabbi Rabinowitz correctly, and that's why we began the OU Kitniyat program, we were living in a world where the Sfardim, I could speak a little bluntly, thought, well, if the Ashkenazim aren't thinking about us, we won't think about them, and we'll make our assumptions that it must be kosher for Pesach, which is obviously incorrect. But now we're not talking about Sfardim Ashkenazim anymore. We're speaking about religious Jews who want to do what's right, and they're making all sorts of incredible assumptions that have no place. And then just tonight, as I was eating dinner, somebody calls me, and he says to me, you know, I have a terrible sore throat, and I'm certain I'm going to have that sore throat last through Pesach. And whenever I have a sore throat, I suck Ricola candies. Can I take them on Pesach? I said, do they have a kosher for Pesach supervision? He says, no. They said, why would you think that a candy can be eaten on Pesach if it's not certified kosher for Pesach? And again, there are all sorts of ingredients and sweeteners and equipment. I don't even understand how people who are observant people and care about kashrus are even trying to make these assumptions. And especially in a world where, as Rabbi Elif said, there's so much, we have the Pesach directory with so much products that are certified for Pesach, and we're not the only ones that are certifying food for Pesach. Ladies and gentlemen, look for the kosher for Pesach symbol. It'll be the safest thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. In fact, everybody spoke about the power and the importance. Rabbi Meirav and Rabbi Welcher spoke about food and the connection of food to Pesach. I recently was speaking, and we know the Gemara says that if somebody eats forbidden foods, v'tamtem libay shalodam. V'tamtem libay shalodam, defined simple, means they clog your arteries. If we have physical arteries, we have spiritual arteries, and eating non-kosher food clogs our spiritual arteries. So somebody, a serious person, came over to me after that lecture and says, Rabbi, so how do you fix that problem? You know, somebody has artery problems with their heart, they go to the doctor, they do angioplasty or whatever medication. Rabbi, what is the medication for Timtum Halev? What is the remedy for somebody who maybe ate non-kosher food? I said, it seems to me that the remedy is starting to be very careful about what you eat. And if there's a time and a place where we should be most sensitive and careful about what we eat, I think it's Erev Pesach. So part of that is looking for the kosher symbol and not making assumptions.
Based upon that, look, when the OU says that a certain product can be used for Pesach without special certification, such as an unflavored water or tea or coffee, are these products essentially OU kosher Pesach, or are they no different than any similar product that just have no reason for certification?
So first let's define OUP. I think that symbol, that popular symbol, OUP, needs a definition. The definition of OUP is that product was made with full-time rabbinical supervision to make sure it's kosher for Pesach. Every OUP product, almost every, but really high 90%, was made with rabbinical supervision. And that's the right way to do it. However, there are some products that are so simple
and so obviously kosher for Pesach, and it's not based on assumption. It's based on very, very thorough research that, of course, the research includes what could go wrong. And we are in these factories. We're never going to list a product as not requiring an OUP symbol if it's not a factory that we certify all year. When you combine all of those factors, then, and again, it's on a limited basis. Limited basis, of course, we eat a lot of food, so it's not that limited anymore. But those are the foods that, after thorough research, after being a factory that we certify and supervise all year, are products that will be listed in what we call the gray area of our directory as acceptable for Pesach, even without the OUP symbol.
Is there any reason for it being left on such products, even though they've been said to be okay?
So that's actually an excellent question, and I personally, I may not be towing the party line here, but I personally would say to be machmer. And I'll give you two reasons. Number one, because chinuch, there are many people here who are parents, and we're trying to teach our children about kashrus, and we're trying to teach our children about the importance of looking for reliable certification. If there's a product that doesn't have a symbol, a certification on it, or even if it does, but it's not certified for Pesach, children don't understand. I don't know how to say it in English, I know how to say it in Yiddish. Children don't understand chachmas. Children don't understand these kind of nuances. Well, it's okay because it's water, but it's not okay because it's candy. If is or it isn't. And I think as parents and grandparents, we have an obligation in the chinuch of our children to teach them. You look for a Pesach symbol. That's one point I'd like to make. The other point is, although, and Rabbi Rabinowitz could tell you maybe even better than I, we spend so much time and effort and resources and researching this. And coffee is a great example. People call all the time about coffee. Does coffee need special Pesach supervision? And the answer we give is that the regular coffee, unflavored, with nothing else in it besides roasted coffee, is fine. Decaffeinated coffee needs Pesach supervision because the decaffeination process could use alcohol, and the alcohol, whenever you see alcohol, we obviously have a red flag as far as Pesach is concerned. I could tell you, the last week I was reading a back and forth amongst kashrus professionals that said that many coffee roasting facilities do make flavored coffee. And flavored coffee is already a question, because you need to know that the flavor is kosher for Pesach. So why doesn't it affect the kashrus of the coffee? Because usually the way it's done is you roast the coffee, and that's all that's done in the roaster. And if you're going to add a flavor, it's going to be done later in the process, and therefore it doesn't affect the kashrus, even the kashrus for Pesach status of the coffee. Well, apparently there's something called whiskey-infused coffee. It means the coffee has whiskey infused into it that, you need it to be able to drink coffee. And in some factories, again, I'm not saying this is the common case, but in some companies, they're not adding the whiskey after the roasting, they're adding the whiskey before the roasting. And therefore, the roaster that's roasting that coffee also has whiskey in it. And that, of course, would affect the equipment. So even if you're buying regular roasted coffee, well, it was processed in equipment that was used for whiskey, which is chametz gomer. Again, I don't want to create any tumult. I don't want to create an issue. But it could happen. And if you're in the store and there is coffee that's certified for Pesach, so buy that coffee and you know for sure that there's no shayla.
Once we're on the topic of hummus gomer, a lot of products say that they contain vinegar. Should one sell that if they don't sell hummus gomer, should that be tossed out? And what would presume about products that have vinegar in them?
So actually, Rabbi Rabinowitz mentioned that as well. and products that are produced here in the United States. The vinegar in the United States, we here in the United States have an abundance of corn. And because we have an abundance of corn, and corn, as Rabbi Rabinowitz explained so eloquently, is kitnius, so even if we're Ashkenazim and don't eat kitnius, it's not chametz, you do put it together with the rest of the chametz, it shouldn't be left out, but it's not chametz gomer. That's the subject of a lecture for itself, if chametz gomer should be sold in the chametz or not. The reality is that there's good reason not to, because the whole concept of mechiras chametz is sort of complicated. I don't think anybody really believes that the non-Jew to whom you're selling your chametz is showing up on Pesach and emptying out your pantry. But be that as it may, and that's why people are reluctant. I do, on the other hand, have to say, so many people say to me, oh, I don't sell chametz gomer. I'm very careful. I'm not going to rely on chametz gomer to sell on Pesach. But the store where you buy chametz gomer right after Pesach sold the chametz gomer. So you're not really fooling anybody, or maybe you're just fooling yourself. Having said that, product produced in the United States with vinegar is highly unlikely to be chametz gomer, and even if you don't sell chametz gomer, you could sell such products.
Often people shop at Costco when they're preparing for Pesach. Is there a problem with the water that they sell there that says minerals added?
So again, the rule of thumb is that plain water that has nothing added to it, no minerals, no flavors, no herbs, I don't know what else they could add to water, is fine. Once there are additives to the water, there's adequate reason to be lenient, but my personal opinion is, don't buy any of that type of water unless it has Pesach supervision. If it's plain water, then it's fine.
Lots of people have medications that are prescription from a physician. Would they be allowed to take those pills? Would they allowed to take medications in pill form? What about as liquid or as chewables?
So again, this is a very, very, very important question and a very important topic. And I've had the opportunity to speak in different locations as we get ready for Pesach, and I've spoken about this subject quite extensively. Anybody who's taking a medicine, and if you're taking a medicine for a chronic condition, the definition of a chronic condition is not that chas v'sholem you're laid up in bed or you're in the hospital. Chronic condition means that you have a condition that must be treated by medicine. Hypertension, heart condition, cancer. I don't have to list all the machlis. We want to speak about the happy things. And the medicine you're taking is in a pill form that you're just swallowing. Just take the medicine. Just this morning, somebody called my home, a prominent member of our community, a very important person, special person, and he says, I'm taking 3 medicines, and can I speak to you about the 3 medicines? And I say to him, no. He says, why don't you want to speak to me about the medicine? I said, because I don't care which medicines you're taking. Just take them. I happen to know the man is 90 years old. I asked him, are all 3 of these medicines that you just swallow? He said, yes. Then you don't ask questions. Just take the medicine. And all of these lists don't really make a difference. And we could even probably have a long conversation about the accuracy of these lists. And they're totally not necessary. Just take the medicine. However, if the medicine is in a liquid form or in a chewable form, that becomes more of a question, because that's derech achila. You're actually drinking the medicine, and there it becomes a little more complicated. So of course, if you could get that medicine in a pill form, that's what you should try to do. If it's not available in a pill form, again, if it's pikuach nefesh, if it's something that you really, really need to take or really need to do, again, I emphasize, just take it. If not, then if you could avoid taking it, then avoid. Where it's a little more gray is vitamins. we get a lot of questions about vitamins on Pesach, because vitamins aren't a medicine. And now, is vitamin really something you have to take, or is it really a supplement? So the first thing I tell people that call about vitamins is to call the doctor, not the rabbi. And the doctor should tell them, well, you're taking this vitamin, is it considered part of your It's dead. Okay, so I'll try to speak loud. Does he consider it part of your medical regimen, or does he consider it just something that is like eating chicken soup when you have a cold? If it's considered part of your medical regimen, then I recommend that you could take it following the same rules that I said about medicine, a pill. If it's not really part of a medical regimen, it's just something you want to take to make yourself feel stronger, so then I would recommend that what you should do is that there are many companies now that are certified, that manufacture vitamins that are certified and that are owned and managed by religious scientists that know what goes into these vitamins and what the issue are for Pesach, and Maxi Health and Zahler and Frida and some of the other companies. And if there's a vitamin that you take and you want to continue taking over Pesach, call them and they'll be helpful in telling you the status of those vitamins. And again, going back to what Rabbi Rabinowitz said, if it's just kitnius, even if you're Ashkenazi, I would be lenient.
If someone had products from a previous year for Pesach, such as an unopened bag of chia seeds or coconut flour, would they be able to use it on Pesach?
Yes, as long as you're sure that it was closed and kept in a place that it didn't have chametz able to penetrate.
Stoves and ovens have continued to develop and turn into different types of gadgets with a lot of computer parts to that. A lot of the stovetops now have glass tops. Can you kasher those for Pesach? Yes. If so, how do you kasher them? And if not, what can be done to cook for Pesach?
So this is a very, very important question, because one of the new customs that have developed in Klal Yisrael for Pesach is that you must spend Pesach in Florida. So if you have to spend Pesach in Florida, I don't know why. I'm not from Florida, and I don't spend Pesach in Florida, but apparently most ovens and stovetops, most stovetops in the state of Florida are not like what we have, which is gas and fire, but they're electric ovens. I understand, I spoke about this just recently somewhere, and somebody came over to me and told me it's for safety reasons, and there's actually a strong movement that should become the law in New York State as well. But be as it may, in Florida it's already the case. And the top of it there are electric coils, and above the electric coils there's a glass sheet. And Rabbi Rabinowitz spoke about the difference in customs between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, and this is one more of those examples. For all year round, both Sephardim and Ashkenazim believe that glass doesn't absorb, and therefore you don't have to kasher glass. Many people have only one set of glasses that they use both for dairy and meat. For Pesach, the Sephardim believe, the Shulchan Aruch says that that's the same. The Ramah says that we should be strict when it comes to Pesach when we speak about glass. And therefore, Ashkenazic Jews do not kasher glass for Pesach. So now we have a real problem. You come to the home, and the oven is not kosher, it's chametz, I don't know what it is, and you can't use that oven, and you can't kasher it because there's a glass top. So of course, the simple advice, which you shouldn't do, is put a metal sheet on top of the glass. If you're going to do, and then put everything you want to cook on top of that metal sheet, what's known as a blech that people use in Shabbos. I don't recommend you do it, because if you're going to do so, you're going to cause the glass, because the heat will remain under that blech, and it will cause the glass to crack. So that's not a great piece of advice. The two pieces of advice I could give The first one I'm not taking any responsibility for, but there are supposedly different materials that are being sold, rubber sheets, or different materials that can be put on top of the glass that will serve as a barrier on top of the glass, but will not cause the glass to crack. I don't take any responsibility. You could check and do as you please. What I tell people, and I told this to family members who have gone to Florida, if included in the expense and the bother of schlepping to Florida, you could buy, it doesn't cost a lot of money, burners with 2 old-fashioned burners that you could put on the counter and use that for cooking, and you'll know you're safe without any question, not in halacha and not in safety. You know, I'm going to sit. Because I cloud up bed.
Goes on.
What's the story with milk for Pesach, especially now that there's oat milks on the market that come also from dairies?
So oat milk, I don't know why I have to say it, but oat milk obviously is common. It doesn't have to be said, but it'll be said. Oat milk is common, and there's nothing you can do about drinking oat milk on Pesach. Regarding dairies, even dairies that are bottling oat milk and cow milk, there's always a cleanup in between, and it wouldn't affect the status of the dairy milk. If, however, what is the issue with milk? As you'll see, every bottle of milk legally that's sold in the United States must have vitamins added to it. And there's a question about the status of those vitamins. And because there's a question about the status of those vitamins, so if you're buying milk which is certified kosher to Pesach, that certification agency is making sure that the vitamins that are being used are acceptable for Pesach. If it's not certified milk for Pesach, then you should buy the milk before Yom Tov. So even if the vitamins are not kosher to Pesach vitamins, they become bottled before Pesach. So again, if you're buying it certified for Pesach milk, you could buy either of Kolamoid. If you're buying not certified milk, not certified kosher for Pesach milk, buy it before Yom Tov and put it in the fridge to eat it.
As we wind down here, we say, Ain't Simcha, Yom Tov is a man of Simcha, Ain't Simcha El Nabas of the Dogim. Is there any problem with frozen fish from the supermarket? And then the Basa part, is there a problem with just raw meat that they have in the freezer?
So, of course, the number one question, we have rabbis at the OU who are dedicated all year round to answering questions. We have one Rav who answers questions on the phone, one does written communication, and before Pesach, we're inundated with calls. My dear colleague, a friend, Rabbi Ella, really manages this entire operation of consumer interface at the OU. And now as Pesach approaches, we increase the amount of staff that answer questions, not just the amount of rabbis that are answering questions, but also increasing the hours, work longer every day. Even next Sunday and Monday, when our office will be closed, there will be rabbanim answering calls for the community. And I would say that the number one question is, can we buy Casco salmon for Pesach? And the answer is yes. The number two question, which is a little late for that question, but that we get that question, you know, there are people like my wife, they start thinking about Pesach the day after Pesach. They're thinking about next year Pesach. But there are some people that are buying meat for Pesach already in the winter, which is a smart thing to do, because the price of meat, one thing for sure, we know the price of eggs as they go people Pesach. That's guaranteed. But usually a lot of meat also goes up. But plain meat, that means you buy a regular piece of chicken or a regular piece of beef or veal that is not in any way processed. I'm not talking about cold cut, salami, or corned beef or frankfurters, nor is it pickled or had spices added. But just a simple plain piece of meat, a simple plain piece of chicken. A lot of people may have that in their freezer. and they're thinking, do I have to go to the store to buy meat for Yontif, or can I use the meat that I have in my freezer? And the answer is, if you use it, you probably are doing what I'm going to recommend anyway, but before you actually cook that piece of meat or that piece of chicken, rinse it. But I would imagine most people rinse it anyway. And before you call me, if you didn't rinse it, it's fine anyway. Of course.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Elephant. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I know the hour's late. We would like to wish everybody a Chag Kosher v'Sameach and a good bench Yontif.